Welcome back to another video full of jaw-dropping real-life stories, and this one is full of bone-chilling dangers and eerie phenomena. Picture this: you're home alone at night, the doorknob starts rattling, and a woman's voice calls out for help. You go to open the door, but your gut tells you that something is off. What would you do? Well, it happened to one of our storytellers, and the choice she made is the reason why she lived to tell the tale. When I was about 8, my family and I rented a beach house for a week. The journey was not too long, but as a kid, it felt like forever, and by the time we arrived, I desperately needed to use the bathroom. As we parked our car, we were greeted by the lady who owned the house. She gave us a tour and tips about the local area, but all I could think about was using the toilet. So I asked her where it was, and she pointed me to the second door on the right, past the kitchen. As I opened the bathroom door, to my surprise, there was an older man there. Embarrassed, I muttered an apology and hurriedly left the room. I came back outside, and they noticed my quick return. I explained there was already someone in the bathroom. That's when things got weird. The landlady looked baffled and assured us that the house was empty. Even after a thorough check, we found no one else. Then the lady turned white as a sheet. She said that her dad, the former owner of the house, had recently died. She had inherited the property and began renting it out. In my heart, I was pretty certain the man I'd seen was her father. When I was a high school senior, and early in my college years, I served as an EMT in a small village near New York City. One night, our team was the primary emergency service for our own village and the two neighboring ones, as they were temporarily unavailable. One of these neighboring towns wasn't the safest. Usually, the authorities would get to the scene first, but not this time. That night, there was a fire and some investigation happening elsewhere in the town. This meant resources were spread thin. Then a call came in. A young man with a face injury needed help at a private home, and he was in the backyard. Our dispatcher told us no law enforcement authorities or EMTs were available. It was just me and my driver. Although that's usual in many situations, I felt uneasy. We arrived at the scene, an apartment complex with a backyard accessible by car. My driver pulled in, and we noticed the patient sitting in the shadows like he was hiding. I felt something was strange, so I turned on the ambulance's floodlights, and they illuminated the yard. What I saw was terrifying. There were 7 men, armed with baseball bats and tire irons, standing in what had been complete darkness. We quickly retreated, my driver reversing out of there. I called for immediate backup on the radio. We later learned these guys planned to ambush us, take our ambulance's meds, and take the vehicle for a spin. To this day, I shudder at the thought of what might have happened if we had approached the patient directly. When I was about 16, my growing family decided to move from the home I had known all my life. As we packed up our stuff, it was natural for us to reminisce about the memories we had created in that house. One day, I decided to go into the closet downstairs and read with a flashlight, something I used to do as a child when I needed a bit of peace and silence. This wasn't your average closet. It was one of those deep, under-the-stairs closets. It extended about 2 meters back before taking a left turn into a low, roughly meter-high area, which was mostly filled with a pile of old blankets and stuffed toys. Naturally, that was the coziest spot to sit and read. About an hour in, as I adjusted my position for comfort, I heard a creepy sound. It was a hoarse, distorted voice saying, "You always make me happy." I completely freaked out. I hit my head on the ceiling and almost crashed through the door in my hurry to get out. After calming down and explaining to my family why I looked like I'd seen a ghost, I braced myself and went back in to investigate. It turns out it was my old little bear stuffed toy from when I was 3 or 4. I'd accidentally pressed its belly when I shifted my position. I nearly burst out laughing, but then something even weirder happened. When I tried pressing the belly again, nothing. This bear, which I hadn't touched since I was a toddler, had used its last ounce of power, its final breath, to make me know I made it happy. I used to live on a 5-acre plot of land, surrounded by a cow pasture on all sides. I always used to entertain my indoor dogs with playful little songs. One of the tunes I'd sing was the nursery rhyme, "Daisy, Daisy." Usually, I'd sing these songs inside the house, because that's where my dogs are most of the time. But one fresh autumn night, as I was at home, alone with my windows thrown open, I heard something. It was a faint, deep whistling sound. The tune they were whistling? It was Daisy Daisy. Whomever or whatever it was, they were whistling the tune slowly, with intention. Once they reached the end of the song, the whistling suddenly ceased. I was too spooked to peer outside, and to this day, I still don't know what caused that eerie sound. When I was 8 years old, I was sitting in the dining room, sketching at the kitchen table. Suddenly, I heard a voice that sounded just like my mom's, "Hello, Ryan." I swung around to my left, expecting to see her, but it was something much worse. I was met with a distinct, full-bodied, shadowy figure about 3 meters away from me. I was utterly shocked and stared at it mutely for about 10 seconds. The shadow figure then turned to its left and vanished through the wall. I got up quickly and headed in the opposite direction into the living room where my brother was busy with his homework. Noticing my distress, he asked, "What's wrong?" "I saw a ghost," I stammered. Surprisingly, he responded with, "Is that who called you?" That was a detail I hadn't mentioned to him. One possibility for the identity of the shadow person could be my late grandmother. She had passed on from lung cancer 8 months prior to this event. Her voice was quite similar to my mom's. She used to take care of me as a baby, although I never got to know her very well. The last time I saw her was during the final stages of her illness. My only memory of my grandmother is from her last days. What strikes me as very odd about this entire incident is the effort it must have taken for her to manifest in that form and to speak out. Moreover, the message she chose to convey after gathering all that energy was simply a hello. It all seems so uncanny. About 10 months ago, I experienced an eventful night due to a severe snowstorm. Roads were off limits, and everyone was instructed to stay home unless they were medical personnel handling emergencies. Exhausting from shoveling snow all day, I could only manage to eat dinner and hit the hay. I passed the time watching some classic Star Trek until I dozed off. A couple of hours later, I found myself awakened around 1 a.m. by a mysterious sound of a door shaking. Even scarier, there was an under-the-breath whisper calling my name. I realized it was emerging from my parents' room, and the sound was gradually fading. I plucked up my courage after lingering around for about 10 minutes to investigate this peculiar occurrence. Equipped with a basic folding knife, I cautiously nudged open the door and slinked inside. It was pitch dark, and my vision was blurry. As I trudged in the darkness, something tugged at my leg which spooked me. Amidst hushed whispers, I heard something even more terrifying. I recognized my father's voice, pleading for help. It turned out he had a stroke en route to the bathroom. After collapsing, his left foot rattling the bathroom door was his only way to alert me. My mom, out cold on the living room couch, couldn't help. I hastily dialed 911, and miraculously, despite the terrible weather, help arrived within 10 minutes. That night went down as the most frightening one of my life. My dad had a hemorrhagic stroke, causing significant blood loss. The doctors were not optimistic about his survival odds. Fast forward 10 months, my dad's cognition remained intact, despite being paralyzed on his right side. He battled numerous infections while in the hospital, but nonetheless, soldiered on and is still with us today. I was out of state for work when my home security alarm went off late at night. Through drowsy eyes, I saw a hazy, bright spot acting all weird in the lower left of the screen. Picturing a burglar waving a flashlight in my house, I was spooked. It was near midnight, and there I was, holed up in a hotel hundreds of miles away. I don't believe in ghosts, but your mind can play tricks on you at such times. Rather than making a futile call to the authorities and feeling embarrassed, I used the speaker function of the camera. I decided to shout, "Back off! The authorities are on their way!" But the strange light seemed indifferent, so I ended up just staring at it from my quiet hotel room until it disappeared. The same happened the next 2 nights. When I played the footage to my workmates, they jumped to the conclusion that it was a ghost. I had the pet sitter scout out the house for any footprints in the fresh snow, but she found zilch. I arrived home to find everything as I had left it. But then I had an unsettling realization. I had to sleep there with the ghostly light. So, after sundown, it became my mission to figure out what it was. It only took 2 nights for me to unravel the mystery. We'd had a bad winter, and I had used an internet life hack to throw rock salt in a pair of tights up into the gutters to ward off ice dams. One of the hang-down strings had a little ice gem on it. It was swaying in the wind and throwing back the driveway light into the house. It's not spooky at all now, but let me tell you, when you're far from home and you see some spectral light in your house, it can really mess with you. Back when I was 16, in the mid-1990s, I fought with a friend at their house one time when we were all hanging out. It was a silly argument and I can't recall what sparked it, but I thought, forget it, I'm going home. My house was a few miles away, and without a car and no buses running at 2 a.m., I was left with no choice but to walk. So there I was, resolved to trek home in the middle of the night across a neighborhood that wasn't as safe as you'd think as a small 16-year-old girl. Looking back, my pals either didn't think I'd actually do it, or the sudden outburst had left them too stunned to realize I was serious. I left the house without missing a beat. A mile in, the suburban backdrop gave way to a major road with a highway nearby. That's when I noticed an unfamiliar gray minivan tailing me. It would lurk behind me, speed past, turn at a corner, and a few blocks later, the sequence would repeat. It was too noticeable to ignore. Opting for precaution, I crossed the street so I was moving counter to the flow of traffic, and no car could sneak up from behind. But the van continued its strange antics, just from the other side of the street. Around a mile later, I spotted a 24/7 convenience store. It had bright lights, but a somewhat deserted parking lot. Without missing a beat, I dashed across the lot aiming for the store. As I neared the doors, the tailing minivan rolled into one of the parking spaces. I was so scared, I thought I was going to pass out. A man on the driver's side hollered, "Don't come closer, stay there. I just wanted you to know why I was doing this." He went on, "I saw you walking a while ago and noticed a suspicious dark car trailing you. Whenever you turned or stopped, it moved to a side street, but kept pace." He kept going, telling me, "I decided to tail you both to ensure your safety. Step inside the store and call someone to pick you up, please. I haven't seen the car since you crossed the lot." He stuck around until I was safely inside, then drove off. I had no one to call, so I told the night cashier what was happening and hung around for about an hour and a half. Then I continued my walk home. I never spotted the dark car the stranger talked about, but I've always believed that his presence that night saved me. I was alone at home, seated in what used to be my sister's room, which became our home office. At 19, I was hammering out a paper for college on the desktop. The room still had my sister's flair, a photo of mountains and wall plaques spelling out faith, hope, and love. Out of the blue, I felt an eerie chill. It was often frigid there, but this chill was different. Right after that freeze, everything on the room walls crashed to the floor all at once. It gave me the creeps, but things took an even worse turn. I left the room and found that everything on the house walls had toppled. Not just the family photos and trophies from my younger days of sports, but even a decorative candle stand was lying on the floor. I was at a loss. So I gathered all the fallen things and rehung them, which took me a good 15-20 minutes. After that, I headed to campus to finish up my paper. I never let my parents in on this mysterious incident. When I was just a little 8-year-old kid living in a super remote part of Appalachia, I was cozying up on the couch with my dad one wintry, snowy night. We were watching Sightings, this old 90s show about alien visitations that made my skin crawl. Out of nowhere, during the show, we heard a distinct knock, knock, knock coming from the window. Remember, it's pitch dark outside, so whatever knocking can see us while we were totally blind to it. Papa told me to stay put, phone in hand, and rushed out with his flashlight to investigate, locking the door behind him. He told me if he didn't return in 5 minutes, I should call 911. I was scared stiff. After making a round of the house, Dad came back, seeming nonchalant, dismissing it as some animal. But right after, he snuck the phone into another room and called his friend to come and have a look. He thought I was totally absorbed in the TV show, but I was all ears. What I overheard him say was terrifying. He said, "I'm telling you, it was like someone was knocking on our window wanting to come in, but there were no footprints. It still gives me the chills, even now that I'm well into my 30s. A few years ago, my aunt and uncle moved into an old 19th century house located in a small town in Maine. It was just like something you'd read about in a Stephen King novel. Their neighbors gave them a heads up about past eerie happenings, and sure enough, since settling in, they've reported a series of peculiar occurrences. For instance, a strong aroma of chocolate would fill the kitchen even though no one was cooking, not to mention household items getting moved around and showing up in weird places. My aunt, who is a retired school principal, keeps a number of old files stored away in a basement cabinet. During one of my stays, I woke to find one of these files under my bed. Strange because there's camping equipment and old furniture blocking the way to that cabinet. Occasionally, there were unaccounted for banging noises, but the incident that stands out for me was when my uncle's meds went missing. In frustration, my aunt sternly asked the presumed ghost to not mess with his medication. Remarkably, the pill bottle was later found standing upright under the bed, an unlikely result of simply rolling underneath. That was the last of the med disturbances. The ghost, so far, seems to be harmless, perhaps even a little mischievous. So, back in my high school days, I remember one night in winter when I was home alone upstairs on the computer chatting with a pal on AOL Instant Messenger. All of a sudden, I got this creepy feeling like I had company or was being watched. I ventured downstairs and peeked around. Our back door that led into the sunroom was wide open. It was bone-chillingly cold outside, and I was home alone. But there was that open door. Completely freaked out, I dashed to the kitchen and grabbed a massive cleaver. I decided to yell stuff like, "I know you're there, the cops are on their way." I then swept through the house, making sure no one could slip past me. At least, that was the plan. Upon finding no one, I thought maybe the door had been impromptu secured and a gust of wind blew it open. I managed to calm myself down fairly quickly, but that same night, a horrifying incident took place just 5 houses down from me. A woman was tied up in her own home by a guy who threatened her life. She broke free and alerted the authorities. Even creepier, the guy who did it was never caught. Even now, I can't be sure if someone had been in my house that evening, but the coincidental timing has always seemed a bit too eerie. Back in high school, my friend, let's call him John, and I were both into football. We often did extra workouts at our school gym. Even after graduation, we stuck together and even had a stint working side by side. Sadly, John got involved in some bad stuff, and that drove a wedge between us until we eventually stopped talking. A few years passed, and one night I had this peculiar dream. I was back in our high school gym lifting weights with John. We were laughing, chatting, just like the old times, until he mentioned he had to leave. I remember saying I didn't want him to go, that I missed our friendship. I recall feeling sorry as he apologized, saying he really had to split. As he walked away, I said, "Okay, see you later." He simply nodded and echoed, "See you." I woke up to an eerie sound. My phone was ringing, breaking that strangely real dream. On the other end, it was my mom, who told me the shocking news. John had died the previous night. She'd learned this from John's mom. I can't shake off the feeling that I had a paranormal experience that night, allowing me to reconcile with and bid farewell to my old friend. In its own way, it gave me a sliver of closure. When I was little, I frequently got sick with fevers that didn't respond to any medicine. Out of the blue one day, a man we didn't recognize approached my mom in the street, asking her why I was so prone to illnesses. He then inquired about the old lady who was with me. Mom looked around, but there was no one else, certainly not an old lady. The stranger began to describe a woman who remarkably resembled my late grandmother, right down to her hairstyle and the attire she was dressed in for her last journey. Now, my dad was from a different town, so Mom would absolutely recognize if this stranger was a common acquaintance. There was simply no way he could have known about my grandma's appearance before this encounter, unless he was really seeing her spirit. Then, he gave some advice, instructing my dad to ask Grandma to move on. Dad did as suggested, and just like that, my strange fevers seized. In 2003, I was stationed at a small military base in Afghanistan, not far from Kabul and just before the mountains leading to Pakistan. The base was a former enemy camp before our takeover. We set up an observation post atop one of the few intact buildings. It was a stark 55 feet high concrete structure. The building appeared to be an old office or makeshift medical facility, identifiable by empty spaces that once held windows and doors surrounded by random debris. But the most haunting sight was in the bathrooms. There was dried blood absolutely everywhere. It clogged up the floor drains, urinals, and toilets, with disquieting bloody handprints and splatters on the walls. The blood had pooled on the floor due to the blocked drains, eventually hardening into a grim scene. This horrifying sight was the same in every bathroom in the building. But that was just the start. After nightfall, if you sat still and listened, you could hear crying. Despite my skepticism towards divine beings and an afterlife, the noises I heard were inexplicable. Although I had previously heard about such sounds from others, I had dismissed those until I decided to lend an ear. Initially, sitting in the staircase amidst the building, I heard nothing, almost branding the noises as a hoax. But then, I suddenly started hearing cries. Suspecting someone might be playing a prank, I ventured into the direction of the sound. Navigating through the simple layout of the building, through a few large rooms filled with scattered debris, I realized they were maddeningly empty. Even the blood-stained bathrooms were deserted. The crying seemed to echo from the opposite end of the building now. Considering the possibility of a prank or auditory illusion, I inspected that area, only to find it as vacant as the rest. The crying seemed to have moved again, echoing from the other end. Deciding to let it rest, whether a prank or something else, I stepped away. Everyone experienced it, and we all gradually learned to ignore it. A woman tried to get into my house late one night when I was home with my baby. She claimed her husband was after her, but something just seemed wrong. I called 911 and she suddenly left. When officers arrived, I told them the story, and they revealed the chilling truth. They told me that they'd answered a similar call a few blocks over earlier that night, but it hadn't ended well. In that case, the homeowner had opened their door for the woman, only for her and a male partner to push her inside, tie her up, and rob her. I'm so lucky I trusted my gut. That is going to bring us to the end of absolutely chilling true stories. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like rating, subscribe for more, comment below, and we'll be back with a brand new video very soon.